Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I am Adrian Fort, and we're here for the fifth in a 10-part series as we travel chapter by chapter through Absalom, by William Faulkner. This being the fifth chapter, we are a little over, chapter-wise, halfway through. However, you're going to want to note, do I have it in this? Well, yeah. So chapter 7 is a whopper. So there is, I didn't look at the page numbers, but I don't think we're quite halfway through the pages yet, but we are halfway through the narrative, as it were. So what happens in this chapter 5? Murder. We open with murder and mayhem. Rosa arrives at Sutpin's 100 in the wake of Bond's slaying. And after a brief run-in with Clyde, Rosa finds Judith absent-mindedly holding a picture of herself. A picture of herself that she had gifted to Bond. What are we to make of that? Hard to say, but Bond, well, he's dead now. But he's not the only one who is at least figuratively dead. First off, Brother Dearest has sort of disappeared. After that, Rosa, Clyde, and Judith, all of their lives end up on hold. Like ghosts, they exist alone together. They live off the land and they reach out to stragglers whenever they are able to do so. Apparently, survivors of the Civil War. I am not exactly sure the timeline here. If someone cares enough to clear that up for me. It seems that we are still in the midst of this war, but there are still stragglers passing through who the trio reaches out to and feeds when they can. Eventually, however, Sutpin shows back up. Sutpin, being very Sutpin, he does Sutpin. He shows up and he gets right back to work. Then, it's the four of them living alone together. And for a while, they do just that. Sutpin is biting off as much as he can apparently chew by himself, while the lady folk do what they can. Until one day, Rosa notices Sutpin noticing her. It happens a couple more times before he approaches her and he proposes to her in the most Sutpin way possible. He says, essentially, I worked very hard for your sister, and I would be willing to work very hard for you. And that's sort of what he starts doing. It's what he does. He works and he works and he works. And until one day, Rosa is insulted and is jilted, and she leaves. She just up and goes. We do not, again, this is my first pass through this novel, so it's possible there's something that I've missed or that I am missing. And it's possible that there's something that is not given to us yet, but as Faulkner is one to do, will be revealed to us slowly and over time, and multiple times at that. But this insult, to the best of my knowledge, is never expressed to us. It is just Rosa. If Sutpin shows back up, and he becomes Sutpin once again, doing Sutpin things, Rosa is still here, still being Rosa, and still doing Rosa things. She is, I won't say impressionable, she is possibly the opposite of impressionable in that she has already made her mind up about things, and when something does not conform, it's catastrophe. Still, she retreats to her old abode, and neighbors, including Judge Benbow, they bring her food, knowing, undoubtedly, that she is probably still in a position in life where she is unable to provide for herself, or at least provide well enough. And that is, in fact, the case, even with their help, as she is still forced to sneak onto neighbors' land and steal food through the foraging process. The last thing that we are told by Rosa in this chapter is that there is still something on the wing. There's still something living out there in the house at Sutpens Hundred. So what is worth talking about in this chapter? I did not necessarily find anything overarching, so I think what I'm going to do is just sort of walk through the notes as I took them, if that would be all right. And the first thing that I sort of noticed upon reflecting on this chapter is that wisteria. We're told about the wisteria in its second bloom this summer. I had thrown out the conjecture that maybe this wisteria is meant to symbolize not what wisteria is classically to symbolize, but perhaps it is to symbolize the South in general. But I'm starting to think, and perhaps I should have seen this coming the whole time, this wisteria is in fact Rosa. She is in her second bloom as well. She bloomed in independence the first time at the passing of her father, when her father retreated to the attic, and she was sneaking out and doing things as the lady of the house, which she was for all intents and purposes from the moment she was born, as her mother had passed and her sister was already married. But she was acting in real independence at this time. And things, as things often happen for people at that juncture, I got a comment asking if it was necessary that you be briefed on the American Civil War before reading this novel. And I'm not sure that it is. Certainly, it would enhance the process for you. Certainly, knowing more about the Civil War would be beneficial. But Faulkner is a much better writer than that. Faulkner is a much better writer than that. Would it be beneficial to reading Shakespeare's plays about the kings if you knew about the kings? Sure. But Shakespeare was a better writer than that. Faulkner is a better writer than that. This story is a story that I can't tell you how many times. I'm pulling a Trump here. I'm diverging from my diversion into a diverting factor. But I can't tell you how many people have told me since starting this project that they, in their estimation, Absalom is the greatest book that was ever written. And that can't be done if you have to have specific knowledge of a certain event. The reason stories like this live for so long and are so revered is that the individuals within this text are real and you know them. Hell, you probably are them. Do you remember when you first ventured from your parents' house? When you first lived on your own? And for a great deal of people, I think especially bookish people, that first venture is out into the world of college. And while that certainly applies, I mean something a little bit different. I mean the first time that it was, in the great pop culture term, all on a bitch now. I mean that time in your life when her father retreats to the attic. Rose's life, it was all on a bitch now. She had to do everything. And while it is much more of a struggle, you're really living. You're really living at that point, and everything in life becomes much more tangible. The stresses of daily life are intensified, but when you meet them, to the victor goes the spoils. It is not a, while and whereas she had been a sheltered person, this is no longer a sheltered existence. That was her first bloom. That was the wisteria in its first bloom of the summer. This was Rosa in her first bloom of independence. But then the flower died. And we get in that very first chapter about how long, I'm not going to be able to find it now. I wish I had known I was going to go back and do this. For some odd amount of years, she had holed herself up in that house wearing those clothes and only that color. Anyway, that was the flower dying. Here she is, Rosa, in her second bloom, venturing out in independence as an individual and claiming some part of Quentin, catching Quentin's attention, the way one might notice wisteria in its second bloom. So what are we to make of this? This is her second bloom. I think we're to take two things from this. Number one, this being her second bloom, how often does something bloom 3 times in a season? We're probably on the final thrust. Number two, this is claiming attention. This is not simply some old lady rambling. There is a point to what she's trying to do. What is that point? Why are we getting this same story, the retelling of this same few years over and over so far through, where are we here? Through 140 pages of this text. We've only really gotten live action a handful of years presented to us. This is all of Rosa's life. But why? And why is she choosing to present it, to bloom again? The next thing that I have written down happens on page 109, and it is a complete non sequitur. You're welcome. On page 109, that third line of text in the standard print edition, as if it had stood in iron juxtaposition to iron flame to a Holocaust which had found itself less fierce and less implacable. It's just strange to see that word Holocaust, isn't it? To see that word Holocaust not given to us in the context that we almost exclusively read the word Holocaust. This text was originally printed in 1936, the Jewish Holocaust, so probably written, 33 to 35. Though if you listen to Faulkner himself, he just hammered through these things. The Jewish Holocaust was, of course, 41 through 45. So it is strange to have presented to us this word, Holocaust. Not only is it not in relation to the events at the background of World War II, but it is completely ignorant of them. It is completely previous to them. And I believe one of the great, if I can say that, ironies of the word Holocaust and I might be mistaken here. I believe that the word Holocaust is originally a Jewish word, which was for sacrifice. It was to sacrifice something on the altar through fire. Again, neither here nor there. It was just something that stood out to me as we were reading. But further on page 112, we get this. Even as a child, I would not even play with the same objects which she and Judith played with, as though that warped and Spartan solitude which I called my childhood, which had taught me, and little else, to listen before I could comprehend, and to understand before I even heard, had also taught me, not only to instinctively fear her, but that she was to shun the very objects which she had touched. Again, this is a reference to the fact that Rosa is completely unyielding. She is. And it is important to observe this. Every bit as unyielding as is Sutpen, but in a different way. She is unyielding in her judgments. To judge before she even saw. Whereas Sutpen is unyielding in this steam engine-like work ethic that possesses him. So how is it that these two have come to be not husband and wife? How is it that this has happened? It is strange that we are so far in this, and so many of the initial questions that were set up in that first chapter, in those first few pages, are still unanswered. But everything surrounding the questions is given to us. And it is in this fashion that we are being forced time and again. Maybe that's not fair. Maybe Rosa stuck out to me as someone who was untrustworthy, through no fault of the character itself. But I think we are completely warranted in that license to question Rosa at this point. We've seen a lot of stuff from Sutpen that is at least of questionable character. But he's also got a mythos written around him. He is also larger than life. He also has the respect of some very high-standing individuals, but not the mob. The mob wants to arrest him and throw him in prison, but the mob is comprised of some of those individuals who hold him in high regard. What is going on with this character? It seems he is unpopular with the masses, but popular, perhaps revered, one-on-one. Rosa seems to fall almost into that same category, doesn't she? Rosa lives in solitude for a reason. When her father had locked himself away, had disappeared from the town, we sure didn't read about a whole lot of people rushing to her defense or aid. Even Judge Benbow, it seems, unless I misread it, again, I have to point out the possibility of my own fault here. Even Judge Benbow seems to be leaving these care packages on her steps in kind of the middle of the night. He doesn't seem to be rushing out to her defense, doesn't seem to be inviting her over to supper, doesn't seem to be trying to build a community around her. So it's strange for me to see these characters presented in this way. And Rosa is a loner with extreme prejudice. A loner with extreme prejudice. I think that is the correct way to describe her. On page 120, just overshot, have to go back. Yes, there must be love and faith. These left with us by fathers, husbands, sweethearts, brothers, who carried the pride and the hope of peace in honor's vanguard, as they did the flags. There must be these, else what do men fight for? What else is worth dying for? An interesting question from someone who does not plan to do any of the dying. An interesting question from someone who does not plan to do any of the dying, but who is more than ready to judge someone for wishing not to do that dying, for wishing not to be present on those battlefields. This is very idyllic. This is a very idyllic phrase and sentiment, and it comes to us from a very idyllic character. And we have to ask ourselves again about this Rosa character. Why? What is ticking under this character's facade? I think part of the reason that I have been so quick to judge Rosa is that I kind of like Sutpen. I kind of identify with Sutpen. A little rough around the edges, not very popular, but goddamn it, I like to work on things. That is something with which I identify, and anyone who is quick to blame that type of character is someone who's going to percolate under the surface for me. Is going to bubble around the edges as you hold her underwater. But what was I saying? This character of Rosa is giving us all of these judgment claims from someone who does not seem to be in position to make judgments. Someone who seems very ignorant to very many things. Now, there are, I think, quite a few reasons that the Civil War was fought. Love and faith, probably in the lower third of that list, of that compendium of reasons. 121, I saw Judith once in a faded gingham sunbonnet to match the dress, giving them directions about making it. I remember how during all that slow and sunny afternoon they hammered and sawed right under the back parlor window. The slow, maddening rasp, rasp, rasp of the saw, the flat, deliberate hammer blows that seemed as though each would be the last, but was not, repeated and resumed just when the dulled attenuation of the wearied nerves, stretched beyond all resiliency, relaxed to silence and then had to scream again. Until, at last, I went out there and saw Judith in the barnlet, in a cloud of chickens, her apron cradled about the gathered eggs, and asked them why. Why there? Why must it be just there? And they both stopped long and more than long enough for Jones to turn and spit again and say, because it wouldn't be so fur to tote the box. The rasp, 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 under the window of the parlor, building a box, building a, why can't I think of the word? I can't think of the word. I'm having a stroke. But also spitting and answering questions. This little section reads a whole lot like "As I Lay Dying." So it's strange to see this, and it's just this one little scene that glimmers in the middle of this chapter. This one little scene that pops up, and it is so reminiscent of another work from Faulkner. One last thing I want to bring up, 134. Because there is a practicality to viciousness, the thief, the liar, the murderer even, has faster rules than virtue ever has. Why not madness too? That is one hell of a quote. I mentioned Shakespeare once this episode already. The way we think of Shakespeare is often in elevated terms, but when you really get down to it, there's a lot of stuff in Shakespeare that is not elevated. It's a bear breaking in and eating babies. It is incest. It is politics. It is religion. Shakespeare was written to appeal to the masses, and so was Faulkner, believe it or not. Faulkner is not about princes. Faulkner is not about kings. Faulkner is not about presidents. Still, the words of Faulkner carry a mythos. We have been building the god of Sutpin through the underworld of Rosa. And these quotes like this, are so Shakespearean, but in the American dialect, that we have to recognize this for what it is, and that is high literature. God, I would love to see something from Faulkner that just sucked. I would love to see some bit of Faulkner that's just like, it was all right. But I've yet to see it. And it is we've used the word unyielding this episode as well. It is in a very unyielding fashion. Faulkner breaks you and makes you admit his greatness. Faulkner is, quite ironically, the moment you're listening to an Eminem song and he breaks into the Godzilla song, that final little bit of spitting that Eminem does in Godzilla. It's one of those moments where you just have to, well, boys, we saw it, and it was great. That is what Faulkner forces you to do as well. And he does it without breathing either. And I will one more time plug the fact that if you have not heard Faulkner reading his own stuff, you simply have to do it. You've got to YouTube it. There's examples of him reading his own work, and you just have to hear it for a little bit because it comes to life in a way that is indescribable. That is all I have for this episode. I hope to see you next week for Chapter 6, pages 141 through 175 of Absalom. I do have a second channel where I do movie stuff, and I do workout stuff, and I do all sorts of different stuff on that channel as well. I'm trying to make it as open an experience as possible as compared to Strip Cover Lit. If you are interested, I will link that in the description below. But again, I hope to see you back next time for the next chapter of William Faulkner.